When I was in kindergarten, I took my first step towards losing my love for art. I was a small beige child in a very pale Dublin, Ireland, where at the time there were very few non-white people living. The teacher asked us if we would draw a picture of our families. So I was most enthused. I came from a multicultural family, and I wanted to reflect this in my early artwork. So I quickly got a brown crayon and started to draw a picture of my Indian father. When the little girl next to me said, "Stop! What are you doing? No one has a chocolate-colored daddy." Well, I did. So I quietly put my crayon down and I stopped drawing. And this horrible feeling came over me, which I later came to know as shame. How many of us have given up something we love because of the comments of other people on our path? How many of us have stopped seeing the beauty or art or meaning in ourselves or in the world because of other people or what they've said to us? How many of us have given up seeing the artist in ourselves because of abuse or even neglect? Very few of us have memories of ourselves as children, as creative, before we were told by institutions like school or family who we should be and what we should be doing. And slowly but surely, the layers and layers and layers of trauma were painted upon us. Trauma is another nail in the coffin of a creative life. I'd like to tell you a story about a young woman in college in the United States of America who wanted to become an award-winning news journalist and save the world. Think Lois Lane. She was so enthused about this career path that she not only was making A's in all her classes in university, at only 19 years of age, she got a job in a radio news station reporting the news. So there she was on a Monday night, covering the city commission meeting, interviewing the mayor, putting a news story together, and she went back to the newsroom and she recorded the news story for the next morning's newscast. Rushing out of the building, quickly rushing to her car, worried about the homework she hadn't finished yet. She was just closing the door of the car when a hand came in and pulled the car door back. A man she'd never seen before said, "Do you know where Beatty Towers is?" And she said, "The dorms." And before she had even really answered, he punched her straight in the face. He pushed her back in the car, and he got in the car on top of her. She fought him, and she fought him, and she fought him, until he knocked her unconscious, banging her head against the car door. When she came through, she was in the passenger seat, and he was reversing the car with her in it. And she knew she had to get out. She knew she had to somehow find a way out of that car. So while he was looking to reverse the car, she pulled on the door and she threw herself out of the car and she hit the concrete. She got up and she ran and she ran and she ran, and he chased her. And she kept running, and she ran to the main road of the university campus, and she tried to stop cars, but her clothes were torn, and there was blood all over her, and people weren't stopping. So she stood in front of a truck, and the man driving the truck stopped, and he got out. And she asked him what he was doing out, and he said he was a off-duty fireman. And she said, "You need to take me to the police station." He said, "Who did this to you?" She said, "It doesn't matter. You take me to the police station now. And if you take your hands off those wheels, I'll jump out of this car." He was like, "I won't move my hands." But she could still see in the bushes her attacker watching her get in the vehicle. She got to the police station, and immediately the police started searching for the man with her description. They found him 45 minutes later, trying to get into the vehicle of another college student in front of the architectural building. The next morning, the newscast, the first story, was the story of a young woman who had been attacked, abducted, but had managed to get away. And the police had arrested the man. The second story was the story that the young woman had left the night before. The news director recalls that when he heard her voice on the second story, he started to cry because he knew the truth, that she was the girl in the first story. I can recollect the details of this night for you because the girl in that story was me. Case number 8803793. Obviously, it's very hard for me to tell you this story, and I can tell that it's hard for some of you to hear this story. But it's even harder for me not to tell you this story. My silence hasn't done any good. And so I'm here to talk to you because I deeply want the world to change. I really would love for us to see ourselves as an art form so that we could come together and find ways to have a deeper respect for life and for one another. It took 6 months for that court case to come, and I waited, and I tried very hard to take care of my injuries, both physically and mentally. But the truth was, I was completely lost, and no one knew how to help me. In fact, it was like an agreement that we would just pretend it had never happened. I was being referred to as a hero because I had gotten away, gotten a rapist arrested, and put in jail. But the truth was, I was no hero. Nobody knows what they're going to do in a situation like that. You can never tell what you'll do if you'll fight or flight or even play dead. So that didn't do me any good. The day of the trial, the defendant who had attacked me was allowed at that time to sit in the courtroom and glare at me the entire time I had to give my testimony. In addition to that, the female defender who was defending him tried to assassinate my character, and that really hurt too. But the physical evidence was too great. His DNA was in my car, under my nails. My teeth marks were indented in his shoulder. There was no getting out of it. And so the legal team defended the charges of attempted sexual assault with battery, kidnapping, and burglary of a vehicle with battery. The verdict? Guilty, guilty, guilty. A victory? Well, not really. The sad part about this is that I ever had to go through this. But to me, the even harder part about this is that here we are, 30 years later, and people still go through this all the time. I just can't help but wonder, why don't we do better on this? I mean, let's think about this for just a moment. We have the ability to send people into space, and we have the ability to live in a violent-free world, and yet we invest so many more resources in the belief of the first than in the second. So, I ask you, what now? What can we do? Well, I wish I knew. I wish I had the big answer, the big thing that would change everything. But sadly, I don't. I do believe, however, it's so good that we come together and we talk about these things, that we talk about things that are difficult, because we have this habit of drowning ourselves in this toxic positivity of, oh, let's just be positive and feel better. Let's pretend negative feelings don't exist. Let's stop talking about what happened to victims because it makes everybody uncomfortable. Well, I'm here to offer you another solution. What I suggest to you is that we look at steps that we can take as a humanity to move us forward. The first step I'd like to offer you today that worked for me was that we need to get to a place where we embrace all the parts of ourselves: the light, the dark, the shadows, the biology, the history, the personality, the body itself. We embrace all of it because the beauty of art is that art can make sense of tragedy. It can make sense of darkness, and it can make sense of the light. And as we do that, I hope that we become more curious about what we can do as a humanity. For example, one of the things that makes me so curious is that the universe exists 95% in darkness. So how can we not learn to live with the darkness in our own species? The second thing that I did is I realized I needed to disrupt the narrative. I needed a new story. I couldn't just go on living in a story of what had happened to me and what was now wrong with me. Because you see, the problem was he wasn't the only one who got a life sentence. I got a life sentence too. I didn't want to live anymore. I didn't know how to live anymore. I had to completely reinvent myself, and I had to move beyond jaded stereotypes that we seem very stuck in. We really need new stories, and we need new ways to find and celebrate what is right with us. The third thing that I did that was mostly helpful to me was that I reclaimed my imagination. Because in so many ways, art saved me. And as I reclaimed my imagination, I reclaimed my nature, not just nature. You see, we don't go out in nature. We are nature. Nature is in us, in every single one of us, and in every single cell. So in integrating and reconnecting with our nature, we reconnect with our voice, and we can find beauty and meaning again. Let's just pause for a moment. And as we rest into ourselves, let's look around and let's just see the art form in everybody that we meet. Because we just don't know what other people have been through, do we? I don't know what you fear, and I don't know what stands between you and what you want. But I want to tell you that 15 years after I almost was murdered in that university parking lot, I went back into that building and I earned a PhD in communications. So I encourage you to explore what stops you, what prevents you, what holds you back. And use your imagination and creativity to reconnect with the best parts of yourself. And don't let anybody else walk off with parts of you. I see myself now like a mosaic. I was shattered. Tiny little pieces. And lovely, kind, generous people came and took those pieces and put them back together in a new pattern. And that's the beauty of seeing ourselves as art forms. When a pattern doesn't work anymore, we are free to change the pattern. So, if you can join me now in seeing that seeing ourselves and one another as art forms gives us a kind of superpower. And so, as I say this to you now, I want to implore you that the world has need of you and your mojo. It's so important because we are in so much need of it. And I ask you, can we not come together in this dark age and move into the next Renaissance? It's so wonderful to be here today with so many brilliant people. I'm so grateful to have you all here today because it just shows me that we are capable of coming together in a genius cluster and doing this work. So I hope you'll join me each day in embracing a new mantra and in saying, I am an art form. Namaste.